This is going back to the bread and butter, getting away from this division. We do not like what has happened where we can't even go to Thanksgiving dinner with our uncle because you end up in some weird fight that is unnecessary.
I think people only laugh if they're not in those fights. Imagine a Thanksgiving or a holiday or any occasion in 2024 without any of those weird fights with your father or your uncle or your cousin. And what if your father is, for instance, someone like Rudy Giuliani? That is the uniquely painful and complicated situation our next guest finds herself in. Well, to the world, Rudy Giuliani is, among other things, Donald Trump's former attorney, who, according to special counsel Jack Smith's filing out just this week, a desperate Donald Trump turned to because he knew Giuliani was, quote, willing to falsely claim victory and spread knowingly false claims of election fraud, end quote. To Caroline Giuliani, he's also her dad who she feels she has lost to Donald Trump. Caroline writes this in a brand new piece for Vanity Fair, quote, watching my dad's life crumble since he joined forces with Donald Trump has been extraordinarily painful, both on a personal level and because his demise feels linked to a dark force that threatens to once again consume America. Take it from me, she writes, Trump destroys everything he touches. I saw it happen to my family. Don't let it happen to yours or to our country. Kamala Harris will guide us into a brighter future, but only if we unite behind her. Joining us now is Caroline Giuliani. David and the Rev are still here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
What is this like to be telling the truth about loving your father, but also using your platform to endorse Kamala Harris?
Yeah, it was really challenging to figure out how to express these feelings and figure out if I had the strength to share them. But I think for a lot of this election, I've been watching with so many Americans in disbelief and horror at the idea of a 34-time convicted felon who refused to participate in the peaceful transfer of power being so close to the presidency again. But that disbelief also paralyzed me for a while. And I think there just came a moment where I was thinking about my future children, who I very much hope to have. And I saw these two paths for our country, one under Donald Trump, which was full of destruction and cruelty, and one under Kamala Harris, in which women can have autonomy over their bodies again, in which our government recognizes that climate change is real and is doing something about it. A government who respects gay people and trans people and people of color and women and people with disabilities and doesn't treat them like second-class citizens, and also a government that remains a democracy, because that will not happen if we elect Trump again. I think it's really important to remember that this is about so much more than the next 4 years, because the type of damage that Trump will inflict a second time around may not be reversible. I don't think it's something we'll be able to just fix in 4 years. He will change the fabric of our institutions, and that is something that we may not be able to come back from.
Caroline, how does he get people like your dad to help him do all those things?
You know, I can't really speak to what is in other people's minds or why they make the decisions that they make. I think power is very alluring, but I think the more important question is why he's caused such division among so many families in this country. I mean, you were just talking about it before I came on, and it's really true. This is so relatable, having this chasm in your family over Trump. And the reason for that is because he spews this toxic cruelty. And when you are a woman or a person of color or a gay person or a trans person, and someone that you love supports a man like that, it is really hard to reconcile that support with their love for you. So I want healing for our country, and I do want us to find the common humanity in one another, even when we disagree about politics, even now. But if Trump becomes the president again, that will not be possible. Kamala Harris is our only path to healing. And I think she presents a really beautiful path to healing for us.
Caroline, you just said something so profound. I don't want to speed through it. One of the ways that Trump has sort of turned up the toxicity in America is to divide families along these fault lines where the things that you may hold most dear and precious, your own family or your safety, are threatened by someone you love to pieces, supporting the very person that threatens you. What do you think Trump's allure, and maybe it is just simply the power, but what do you think it is that makes smart and accomplished men like your dad choose Trump over the people and issues they love? Like your dad, you know, the first thing you said was Trump is someone with 34 felonies. Your father's known the world over as a prosecutor and a law and order guy, for better and for worse. I mean, he's all in with someone who is diametrically opposed to what his brand used to be. Yeah,
you know, it's a hard phenomenon to understand. It definitely is. I view Trump as a disease. And I think it's really important to remember that with every disease, prevention is a much more effective strategy than treatment. And I really fear that if we elect Trump again, that, you know, I thought we had cured ourselves of it the first time, but it doesn't seem like we have. And I think if he becomes the president again, we may have a terminal illness in our country. And that really, really scares me.
There are many things in my mind that are crystal clear about this case. You are no hero, you abused your position, and you're a charlatan who used and is still using your prior position in office to peddle a snake oil that's been proven to be junk time and time again.
That was a Colorado judge yesterday as he sentenced former elections official, County Clerk Tina Peters, to 9 years behind bars. Peters was convicted of multiple felonies for tampering with voting machines to prove the big lie, even though Donald Trump won her county in the 2020 election by nearly 30 points. Joining me now is Joyce Vance, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama and co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast. Joyce, thank you for being here. I think a lot of people have heard Trump's exhortations that he intends on pardoning January 6 rioters and could offer pardons for federal crimes to Steve Bannon or Peter Navarro. But for these state-level actors like Tina Peters, the cavalry is not coming. Is that right?
Absolutely right. Trump cannot give her a pardon for a state of Colorado crime that she's been convicted of. She will serve about 50% of that sentence. She's eligible for parole once she serves 50% of it. That's the most forgiveness she can look forward to.
You know, in your experience as a prosecutor, I wonder how chilling or how much of a deterrent effect sentences like this, trials like this, you know, comments by the judge, how impactful that is in terms of, you know, warding off future crimes of a similar sort. And I think about that in the context of the 2024 election.
You know, they really do have a deterrent effect, Alex, and I suspect that that was in the front of this judge's mind as he sentenced, because this was a defendant who did not admit that she had committed crimes, who didn't say that she was wrong to abuse the public's trust to try to prove Trump's big lie. And with the 2024 election already underway, that had to have been a consideration that he engaged in. He told her she was a danger to her community, and that danger comes in the context of future elections.
From a sentencing, from a trial standpoint, when you have something that as high profile as this, the Tina Peters case in Colorado unfolding, the sentence that she's gotten, does that, I mean, I know justice is, you know, blind and so forth. There are similar fake electors plots, big lie, alibi, allies in their trials playing out in Georgia and Arizona and Michigan, Wisconsin. Do the judges in those cases look at what's happened in Colorado? How much is there sort of like, you know, our eyes on what's happening here as a potential precursor to what happens elsewhere in the country?
Yeah, it's a really great question. You know, if we're thinking about sentencing, in federal sentencing, judges try to give defendants who engage in similar conduct similar sentences. There's an entire regulatory body of law called the Federal Sentencing Guidelines, and judges really do make that effort. So a judge in Colorado might look at what happens in Washington, D.C., and vice versa, but not so much in state court. And this sentence is long in large part because of the fact that she showed no remorse, but also because the judge there were separate charges that she was convicted on. And typically, the sentence for all of those charges will run consecutively. Or rather concurrently, you get to serve them all at the same time. Here, though, the judge explicitly ran some of those sentences consecutively. So she has to serve the sentences for counts 1 and 4, and then for other counts after that. And it stacks up to a 9-year-long sentence.
Wow. I do wonder how this all shakes out for the guy at the top of the pyramid of lies, Donald Trump. I mean, we know this week that he was supposed to reply to, I think, the 126-page filing from the special counsel about why he should not receive immunity on some of these criminal counts. He has now succeeded in pushing his deadline to respond until after the election. What does that practically mean here, Joyce?
Well, look, I think we need to think about it globally, and we have to say that our criminal justice system didn't work as smoothly as we would have liked for Donald Trump. That feels like a major understatement, those words coming out of my mouth. But the reality is here, whether the Justice Department was slow off the mark, whether the Supreme Court intervened in a way that had, to quote Justice Sotomayor, more a stench of politics than of law, or whether it was because Trump manipulated the legal system or a combination of all of those three. This is an individual who should have faced accountability a long time ago at the hands of a jury. And whether that jury chose to convict or not would have been up to the jury. The process has been delayed, it has been slow, and it has not served the American public well. So I think that's a question that we'll have to deal with, obviously, after the fact. But looking forward, as J.D. Vance likes to do, and thinking about what the future might hold, I think that something we can still have confidence in is that Trump will face accountability if he loses at the polls, and that's something to hold on to.
Joyce Vance, thank you for your time tonight.
So Donald Trump is resorting to conspiracy theories and lies to blast the Biden administration's handling of the Hurricane Helene disaster. But this week, we're learning from new bombshell reporting that this accusation was basically a confession of an absolutely egregious act Trump took when he was president. Two former Trump administration officials now tell Politico's E&E News that as president, Trump repeatedly hesitated to give disaster aid to areas he considered politically hostile or ordered special treatment for pro-Trump states. One of those sources, former National Security Council official Mark Harvey, said that Trump initially refused to approve disaster aid for California after deadly wildfires in 2018 because of the state's Democratic leanings. But Harvey said Trump changed his mind after Harvey pulled voting results to show him that heavily damaged Orange County, California, had more Trump supporters than the entire state of Iowa. Quote, "We went as far as looking up how many votes he got in those impacted areas to show him these are people who voted for you," Harvey said. Harvey, who's since endorsed Kamala Harris for president, later said of Trump, "There's no empathy for the survivors. It's all about getting your photo up, right? Disaster theater to make him look good." On some level, you probably suspected this all along, but this is a genuine smoking gun. People that work for Trump speaking openly on the record about what ought to be a, impeachment level offense. An American president refusing to sign off on disaster aid to people he thought weren't sufficiently supportive of his political ambitions. Trump did exactly what he's falsely accusing the current president of doing. It's also a reminder of part of what was so upsetting about Trump's tenure, remember, 4 years ago, bungling the country's response to its first dangerous pandemic in 100 years, watching him lie and brag and blame his way through interminable daily press conferences. It was crystal clear the political consequences were all he cared about with COVID. He did not give one damn about whether people got sick or died or how many. He cared about his reelection and his political fortunes. He told his vice president, Mike Pence, not to call desperate governors who he deemed insufficiently grateful. He mused about cutting aid to blue states. He talked about limiting testing for COVID because more testing would show more sickness, and that would look bad for him. Now we've got this smoking gun evidence of him basically saying, I'm not going to get disaster relief to California because they don't have enough Republicans there. That's the Trump model of governance. Extreme and thankfully rare. I don't think there's anyone who governs like that. For a different model of governance, look how President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have handled the recent longshoremen strike, a strike over wages and mechanization that threatened to bring trade at many of America's ports on the East Coast to a halt, which could have and would have likely have driven up supply shortages and consumer costs, spiking inflation a month before the presidential election. Now, the politically safe thing, I think, for the Biden administration to do would have been to just intervene, halt the strike, pause it, order union members back to work. And that's a power that's given to the president under the Anti-Union Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. Previous presidents, including Richard Nixon, George W. Bush, have invoked it to stop port strikes. But Biden thought that would be selling out the workers, and they're bargaining for a new contract.
Mr. President, would you intervene in the dock workers' strike if they go on strike on Tuesday?
No.
Why not?
Because it's collective bargaining. I don't believe in Taft-Hartley.
Harris also came out in support of the union dock workers, saying it was about fairness and that she backed the strike, and that support from the president and vice president strengthened the union's position. And after 2 days, the union suspended the strike to continue negotiations on a new contract. Conservatives at Fox News, who were rooting for a costly strike that could impact millions of Americans heading into the election, sounded pretty disappointed.
I've got to prepare all of you to get very angry, because what we're about to share with you will rightly make your blood boil. As most of you know, ports, by the way, along the East Coast were shut down this week because of a union leader's demands. We have the update on that, and including a reported 75% pay raise for dock workers. I think now the employers are up to 62%. Anyway, a lot of them make six figures. Kamala Harris supported this shutdown, which cost you, the American people, is costing us billions of dollars a day.
Well, the longshoremen strike may be temporarily suspended until mid-January, and although Kamala Harris, of course, breathing a sigh of relief tonight, American voters shouldn't.
Everything's politics, right? How does it benefit Trump, right? Now, there wasn't a particularly clear political benefit to Biden and Harris supporting the strike. The Longshoremen's Union, for instance, which endorsed Biden in 2020, hasn't made an endorsement this year, and I'm not sure Harris is going to win a majority of those members. And labor is a core Democratic constituency, but it's also clear that despite the Biden-Harris administration's strongly pro-labor record, union voters in most polls support has hit an all-time low for the Democratic ticket. So this wasn't really transactional politics as much as I think it was just genuinely principled. That the right thing to do in the moment was to side with labor. That's what they believed. And that's not to say Biden and Harris and other politicians across both parties don't have political agendas as well. Of course, they're traditional politicians in that sense. For all their ideological commitments and relationships, though, they do have some sense of the public interest, like what is right, what is best for most Americans. They just don't approach every single last decision by first thinking, what will get me elected? What will give me more power? But that is how Donald Trump thinks. He's a man who changed a hurricane path with a Sharpie because he'd been ridiculed for misstating where the storm was headed, who autographed a stock chart to take credit for every bump in market value in the middle of COVID. He is incapable of thinking about others except in the most instrumental, exploitive ways. We lived through one of the worst examples, and it was so traumatic we basically blocked it out. Now we've learned that he really does see aid as something that only his people deserve. It is possible to expect something more out of our presidents than a constant transactional obsession with their status. You don't have to love Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to see that they really have an idea of what it means to work for the public interest. But you have to be blind to pretend Donald Trump has any interest in anything other than his own weird and broken ego.
The death toll from Hurricane Helene is now more than 200 people, 220 people, while hundreds of others remain unaccounted for. Such tragic figures didn't stop some of the extreme members of the Republican Party from gaslighting the American public about the cause of the storm, with Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeting, and I quote, "Yes, they control the weather. It's ridiculous for anyone to lie and say it can't be done." So, Marjorie, who are they? Who are the they you are referring to? Exactly. Democrats? Jewish space lasers? Who knows? Meanwhile, Donald Trump appeared alongside Georgia Governor Brian Kemp after surveying the damage left by Hurricane Helene in the battleground state. It was yet another opportunity for Trump to bash and lie about the Biden White House for its hurricane response, despite his own unhinged response to disasters when he was president. Jonathan Allen, Sarah Matthews, and Alicia Johnson are back with me. So this is probably, in many respects, some of the most asinine and galling parts of what comes out of this Republican Party, Sarah. Is in a moment of national crisis where we're all trying to deal with what happened. We have loved ones and family and friends who have been affected by the storm. The government is pulling together its resources to respond accordingly. You have these individuals who want to go out and deliberately put out misinformation. So, for example, you have FEMA now having to warn of Helene misinformation, having to launch a rumor response page on their website so that people will get the facts. What the hell's wrong with these people? I mean, these aren't the same people that you and I worked with over these many years. I just don't get it. I mean, in a national tragedy, you love Donald Trump so much that you're going to parrot that kind of crazy out there and promote conspiracy, which, quite frankly, could wind up having people hurt and harmed, not getting the resources and the help they need because they're following Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene stupid down a rabbit hole?
Yeah, it's very clear to me Republicans are not sending their best and brightest to Washington anymore. It is unimaginable to me that at a time when so many of our fellow Americans are suffering, going through probably the worst experience of their lives right now, and what do these politicians decide to do? Politicize it. And what does Donald Trump try to do? Spread lies about it. He was saying that the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, couldn't get in touch with Joe Biden. The governor said that wasn't true, that Biden offered him anything that his state needed. Now Trump is out there saying that FEMA, they don't have enough money for relief for the victims of the hurricane because they were using that money on undocumented immigrants. Right. And the crazy thing is that Washington Post did a fact check, and it was actually Donald Trump during his administration who is taking money from FEMA in the relief fund to use on undocumented immigrants, not the Biden administration.
I'm glad you brought that up because, Alicia, when you look at that, you had Trump initially refused to approve disaster aid for California after deadly wildfires in 2018 because of the state's Democratic leanings, an ex-aide told Politico, adding that Trump changed his mind after Harvey pulled voting results to show him that the heavily damaged Orange County, California, had more Trump supporters than the entire state of Iowa. At that point, Donald Trump was, okay, then we can put some aid in there.
I mean, if there's anyone clearly having a pattern of making this about politics, it is Donald Trump. And it's extremely frustrating. Over 200 Americans have been dead and have been found dead and counting, right? These are families. People have lost their entire livelihoods, right? Like, they can't go back into their homes. And the other piece of this is I just continue to have that image of Donald Trump in contrast to, in moments like this, we are looking for a comforter in chief, right? Someone that can literally go anywhere, red state, blue state, and literally be there to say, I am here with you. Donald Trump was in Puerto Rico tossing paper towels at people, right? And I remember when, we laughed at it because it was crazy, but it's so inhumane. Yeah. And for this man to come out and lie, but then the other sad piece of this is that there are so many people who believe what he says versus the numerous fact checks that are out there by actual credible journalists. So in addition to the Republican Party having to rebuild itself once, they get through Trump, we also have to sow more trust in actual facts in journalism in this country after him, because there is no reason that we are disputing these facts when Brian Kemp is literally on air saying we missed each other's phone call, but we eventually start talking to each other.
And so that's a nice pivot to you, sir, back to the media, because, as another fact checked in 2017, North Carolina, after Hurricane Matthew, made the request for aid. The Democratic governor of the state at that time, Roy Cooper, made the request. And Donald Trump's FEMA, under the instructions that I presume came from somewhere up the chain, only gave them 1% of the money that they wanted. How in your position, when you guys are sitting down and covering, how do you get these stories out in a way to help people understand what the not just what the fact check is, but what the history, the connect, because we've got two sightings right here, just in 2017 and 2018, where the Trump administration did something very different than what they're blaming the current administration for doing. How do you guys cover that aspect of trying to keep that timeline intact?
I mean, not to mention the wild stuff that was going on in the Trump administration during the pandemic.
Yes.
With regard to FEMA, basically ignoring the entire existing federal structure as much as possible, creating side structures to try to bid on, gloves and things like that. I mean, it was a truly inefficient model for helping people. They did help some people, obviously, but it was inefficient. Right. Look, I think we do the best that we can to find, for those of us who have a history remembering these things, we report on the things we remember and double check those. Also try to get out accurate new information. I thought it was really instructive that the congressman from Western North Carolina, Chuck Edwards, a freshman who is very conservative, came out this week and praised FEMA, said he was criticizing them for not water wasn't coming in fast enough. He asked for a certain number of pallets. There weren't cell phone, temporary cell phone towers. There weren't enough of those in his district. And he complained about it. And then within 24 hours, those things arrived. Pallets upon pallets of water arrived from FEMA. And he, to his credit, praised FEMA, even though it's not politically helpful for him to, praise the Biden administration. So, I think you look for, people like that who are telling the truth and get their messages out there. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene's out talking about who controls the weather. I mean, I think most of us look at that as a scientific phenomenon, but even if you look at the Bible would tell you that God controls the weather, right? Think. So, it's not a they. It's not it's not the Democrats or Jewish people who control space lasers, who thinks exist out there.
And I'm sorry. God now. Exactly. I'm just sorry, folks. That for me is just a whole special kind of stupid. I can't. The fact that a current member of Congress puts something like that out in public, you should be ashamed of yourself, Marjorie. You need to go home and sit in the closet and check yourself.
Michigan, this is Barack Obama. I want to talk with you about the Elissa Slotkin I know. Elissa is the kind of leader we need. Tough, independent, and effective. She'll get the job done.
Former President Barack Obama in the home stretch of the election season, throwing his weight behind a handful of Senate races, including in the battleground state of Michigan. Democratic control of the Senate in the next Congress hangs by a thread. Republicans only have to flip 2 of the currently Democratic-held seats to gain the majority in the Senate, and they basically already have 1 in their column, the seat being vacated by West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. Now, Republicans are trying to flip seats in Montana, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, and Maryland. And Democrats are fighting to keep what they have while eyeing a few Republican seats in Florida and Texas. Joining me now is Democratic strategist Adam Gentleson, former chief of staff for Senator John Fetterman and former deputy chief of staff to the late Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. Adam, thank you for being here tonight. I've wanted to talk about the Senate for so long. We won't have nearly enough time to get to all of it. But first, let's start in Ohio. Bernie Moreno is running against Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown, I think, is running for his 4th term. Bernie Moreno said 2 weeks ago that abortion shouldn't be an issue for women over the age of 50, and also has been pushing the lie about Haitian migrants eating pets. How is this still a toss-up race?
It's a toss-up race because Ohio has gotten a lot redder over the last few election cycles. And, it wasn't that long ago that Ohio was a purple state. Barack Obama won it in both 2008 and 2012. But over the 10 years since then, I hate to think it's been over 10 years since Obama's 2nd term, but here we are. It's gotten a lot redder, and that's why it's a toss-up. Sherrod Brown is an incredible senator. He's an incredible fighter for working people in Ohio and across the country. And the reason this race is competitive, the reason he's ahead right now, is that he's such a strong fighter, but he's fighting against very strong forces pulling to the right in that state. And I just want to say one thing about that Bernie Moreno quote that you mentioned on abortion, especially. That abortion quote was so amazing because this wasn't a tracker video. This wasn't someone pressing the question to him. When Moreno said that thing about abortion, he went out of his way to say it. He said, he was answering a different question. And he said, and another thing, let me tell you about abortion, and then gave that completely insane answer. So that just shows what an extremist he is, how out of the mainstream his views on abortion are. But as you said, this race is close, and it's going to be close all the way down to the wire because of the fundamental forces pulling to the right in the state of Ohio.
Yeah, when you talk about those kind of big seismic forces reorienting American political life in the 21st century, in the year 2024, I wonder how you think that plays out in Michigan and Wisconsin. In Michigan, you have Alyssa Slotkin, who Barack Obama did that ad for. She had an 8-point lead in August, which is now down to a 4-point spread. In large part, that's due to independent voters who seem to be, in the words of the Cook Political Report, coming home for her Republican opponent, Mike Rogers. In Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin is leading Eric Hovde by, I think it's 2 points, but that's, again, down from a 7-point spread earlier this summer. Again, that looks like it's independents moving towards the Republican. What do you attribute those independent votes going to the right side of the aisle? Like, what are the forces there? Is that just ultimate sort of polarization? Nobody's really an independent anymore. Do you think that's a change in ticket? How do you look at that?
Independents still exist and undecided voters still exist. The fact that they don't exist is sort of a myth of our culture right now. The idea of polarization can be taken too far sometimes, but they are a much smaller group. That much is definitely true. And so in any of these swing states that are hotly contested, a 7-point win by either candidate is not really in the cards anymore in our era of polarization because that pool of undecided voters is so much smaller. So it doesn't cause me any major panic, having been through a fair number of these tight races in purple states myself, to see a 7-point lead go down to 4 or even 3 points this late in the game. We are, after all, only a month from Election Day, as shocking as it is to say that. But that pool of small undecided voters is going to break, 2/3 in one direction or 3/4 in one direction. And I think that's what you're seeing here is that those leads are shrinking, but they're being maintained by the Democrats. And so some undecided voters are coming home to Republicans, but enough of them are coming home to the Democrats that they're still able to hang on to these statistically significant leads that I think ultimately will be what brings them to victory. It'll be tight, but they'll make it.
So that might be a ceiling in terms of independent movement rather than a suggestion that it's going to continue to swing in Republican directions as the days tick on. I got to ask you about Texas, because I think there are probably a lot of people in the world that would like to see Ted Cruz take his nameplate off the door in the Senate. It has been sort of kicking Cruz out of the upper chamber has been something Democrats have wanted for years now. Colin Allred, the Democrat running in that Senate race, is only running 4 points behind Ted Cruz. And the Cook Political Report moved that race from likely Republican to leaning Republican. How much hope should Democrats pin on that race?
I think Texas is always worth taking a serious look at in terms of investment. And I think Democrats are right to invest in it because it is such a massive prize and the margin is relatively small. And because Colin Allred is a very talented, very strong candidate. And Ted Cruz is a weak opponent. So it's worth it because it is such a prize in terms of electoral votes. It's such a prize in terms of culture and what it would mean for the Democratic Party to be able to claim both California, Texas, and New York as the 3 most populous states in their column. So, Democrats have some money to spend right now. I think they're smart to spend it in Texas. Colin Allred is running a very strong campaign. Ted Cruz is an incredibly weak opponent. His popularity numbers are in the toilet, rightfully so. He's done nothing but preen and advocate for extreme causes since he's been in the Senate. He's done nothing to serve the people of Texas. This is a good race. This is a race worth investing in. And who knows, we may see a surprise on Election Day.
Preen is one word for it, Adam. I could think of another to describe the things Ted Cruz has been doing in the Senate, but it's a family program.
And joining us now is Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a national co-chair of the Harris Walz campaign, one of the featured speakers, of course, at the DNC. Congresswoman, it's great to see you again. You led the campaign's fight for reproductive freedom on that bus tour. Does the Harris campaign welcome any support for abortion access wherever it comes from, even from the former First Lady?
I think that's actually been the really kind of scratch your head moment that we all are examining right now, really trying to figure out, are you guys trying to play good cop, bad cop, and trying to bring people in and to trust Donald Trump? Because obviously when we think about a spouse, we think about pillow talk. And so it's like, well, maybe he's going to be good on this issue. But let me tell you, there's one thing that I believe that the American people are better at, and that is being tricked or fooled. This is Donald Trump's Supreme Court that literally stripped us of our rights. And so considering the fact that he is the one that set us ablaze and set us on fire, I don't then anticipate that he's going to be the fireman to actually put this fire out. So listen, we don't have to trust what they say. We have to trust what they do. And what we know is that Donald Trump has bragged about the overturning of Roe.
And Congresswoman, as a co-chair of the campaign, there's criticism from some that, Vice President Harris is not doing enough interviews, that she's out there campaigning, but she's not taking part in interviews. I know she was willing to do another debate. Donald Trump refused so far. Time is running out. But she seems to falter in interviews. She did one with Stephanie Ruhle. She did one, of course, with Dana Bash. She did one with local Pittsburgh KDKA. That's 3 interviews in this entire campaign.
Yeah, honestly, I was one of those that said, I don't care if she does an interview at all. And I'm going to be honest with you. Listen, she is running a historic campaign in a historic amount of time. And so when you're trying to figure out which one you should really take the time to do, I honestly am the type of person that believes in taking your message to the people. When we consistently hear things like, well, people say that they don't know her and that kind of stuff, I think that they actually want to interact with her. And I honestly think that that is actually where she is her strongest, when she's able to actually be there with the people, feel the energy of the people, and the people be able to feel her sincerity in the policy positions that she's taking and in her message of trust me, because I will take this country forward instead of allowing it to go back. So I think that this is just a very different election. And I think that she's doing the best that she can with the minimal amount of time that she's got left to get this done.
Well, she could certainly do more interviews, local interviews, network interviews, and those all get carried on television. It's the same as a rally. It's having the same impact in terms of reaching a lot of people. That said, you're going to have surrogates. You've got, Liz Cheney. President Obama is going to start campaigning. Do you think we'll see Michelle Obama?
I think that there is a good chance that we may see Michelle. Now, this isn't any information that I've been given, so I don't want anyone to perceive that you're breaking news right now. But we are a big tent party, and we've got a really big bench. And so I think that we are all hands on deck right now. And I think that's what you're seeing, is there's surrogates from the House, surrogates from the Senate and beyond that are out there campaigning. And as you just mentioned, the former president is going to be out there. I think that we all know the force that the former First Lady is. And so definitely, if her schedule allows, I personally believe that she'll be out there as well, because we know that this election is going to come down to every single vote mattering, and it's going to be very, very tight.
Are you concerned about the firefighters union? That has been a key part of the Biden constituency, the Biden base, if you will, the labor movement base. Now that's the Teamsters, it's the firefighters. Is there something she can do to reassure the labor unions, working class people, men in particular, that she's got their back and that she knows their issues?
Yeah, because I haven't been in those rooms to understand what the disagreements have been about, it's hard for me to say what potentially the vice president could do to earn their support. I can say that she has a very strong record. A lot of times when we're going through elections, we only have the promises that are put out there out front. But we know that this is someone who has stood with the PRO Act versus we know Donald Trump and the vast majority of his minions do not support the PRO Act. And so I think that she does have a record. I think that record is strong on unions in record fashion. We know that the teachers union came out almost immediately when the transition was made, and there have been so many other unions. I just can't really speak for what's going on with some of these other unions at this moment. I don't know what the disagreement it is, and so without me being able to assess what the underlying issue is, it's hard for me to say what she can do. But I can say that if you are a middle class working person, there's only one person in this race who has ever experienced that type of life. The other person was born and given $400 million and has never had to work to earn an honest penny a day of his life. We know that he got caught up for fraud in New York. We know that he had to file for bankruptcy 6 times. And so there is only one person who came from that middle class family and has worked her way up. And so if there's anybody you can trust in this fight, if there's only one team that's not talking about union busting, it's the blue team, the Harris-Walz team.
And quickly, let me just ask you about your home state of Texas. There is a hot Senate race. You're making gains on the Democratic side with Colin Allred against Ted Cruz. Just this week, the Cook Political Report moving that race from leaning Republican or likely Republican to leaning Republican. So that's some progress. This could be a key factor in control of the Senate. Is there any chance of a Senate victory in Texas?
I think that there's a chance. Here's the deal. We have been 47th for voter turnout in the country. And when we were 47th, guess what? Ted Cruz only won his reelection by 3 points. This is a guy that no one really likes. I mean, there's plenty of Republicans that dislike him, definitely independents dislike him, as well as obviously Democrats dislike him. So it's just a matter of us deciding that we will show up and get to the polls. If we get to the polls, then it's game over for Ted Cruz. And it is definitely better days in the state of Texas. So I am encouraging everyone, regardless as to whether or not you think we can get this done or not, because I remember in 2008 that I didn't quite believe, but I hoped that we could elect Barack Obama. So even if you don't believe, let's go ahead and hope that Colin Allred can take out Ted Cruz and make sure that we show up to the polls and vote up and down the entire ballot. Because again, as you just mentioned, so long as we can get a Vice President Harris to become President Harris, she's going to need to govern. And governing starts with making sure that she's got a democratically controlled House as well as Senate.
Congresswoman, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I just love the Shirley Chisholm picture behind you.
Thank you so much.
One of my heroes. Thank you.